Gondor, the fabled kingdom of white cities and great towers, the mightiest realm of the Westlands in the Third Age, a rich country with a rich history. Geography. Gondor spans essentially all the land between the Great White Mountains to the wide Bay of Belfalas. The White Mountains, or Ered Nimrais, are tall and imposing, the Starkhorn its highest peak. Besides the mighty Anduin River, numerous other rivers water Gondor from the mountains. At Gondor's latitude, a combination of warm ocean currents and a high-pressure system in the Bay of Belfalas create a Mediterranean-like dry summer, wet winter regime. Much of the country is warm, but not overly hot in summer, with mild winters, while further south along the coast, summers are warmer. The mountains are cold versions of this climate, experiencing abundant winter snowfall. Gondor was once covered in wide forests of drought-resistant trees like oak and pine, but much of it has since been cleared after millennia of farming and shipbuilding. The mountains remain covered in coniferous forests on their middle slopes, giving way to alpine tundra at higher elevations. The mouths of the Anduin, Ethir Anduin, and the inland mouths of the Entwash, Ethir Onodlo, are extensive delta wetlands, habitat for many birds and fish. Animals like deer, wolves, and bears are abundant in the wilds, especially in the west of Gondor. Elves. According to elvish lore masters, the elves first awoke at a place far to the east called Cuivienen, before the rising of the sun. Those who journeyed west became the Eldar, the star folk. Some remained in places like Hrovanien and Eriador, but most continued to Beleriand beyond the Blue Mountains, Ered Luin. Those who waylaid became the Nandor, returners, and if ever they settled in Gondor, they are long gone. First men. As the elves tell it, once the sun first rose, men awakened in the east in a land called Hildorien. From here many houses of men wandered out across Middle-earth. A small, stout race of men, the Druhu, or Druidine, wild folk, were first to reach modern Gondor. Here they enjoyed the bounties of the land, living in the mountains and forests. They carved statues of themselves, which the Rohirrim call Pukelmen, their sole remnant in most places. By the 4th century of the First Age, another house of men, later called Haleth, or the Haladim, migrated along both north and south of the White Mountains. The Haladim brought with them sheep, goats, and cattle, and took much of the best land for pasture, pushing the Druidine into the thick forests northwest and northeast of the mountains. The Haladim passed the First Age unbothered by the events in Beleriand, and by the dawn of the Second expand southeast into Harandor and the west coast of Harad, mingling with the Haradrim there. The Haladim at some point diverged into numerous groups, lost to history, but two known are the Men of the Mountains, the Eredrim, living in the vales on either side of the White Mountains, and the Enedwife, the Middle Folk, north of the Angwin River. Númenóreans. The first probing of Gondor by the civilizations of the West were elves fleeing the destruction of Beleriand, Falathrim, coast folk. They, along with bands of Nandor, settled at the mouth of the Morthond River at Ethelond, Elfhaven. Far more consequential was in 600 of the Second Age. Númenórean Captain Veantur landed at Mithlond in Lindon, befriending the elves there. In the interest of trade and securing timberland for their ships, the Númenóreans established the port of Vignalonda at the mouth of the Gwathlo River by 800. In Minhiriath and Enedwyth, the Númenóreans aggressively logged the forests and drove the natives deeper inland to escape their depredations. By the second millennium, the fallen Maya Sauron had revealed himself since disappearing at the end of the First Age, and began terrorizing Eriador. After the destruction of Eregion in 1697, Númenóreans under Prince Minastir and elves under High King Gil-galad crushed Sauron at the Battle of Gwathlo in 1701. Thereafter, the Númenóreans were able to grow their power and wealth, founding Umbar by 1800 in Harad. Centuries later, in 2350, Pelargir is founded at the confluence of the Sirith and Anduin rivers, formally starting Númenor's engagement with Gondor. By the end of the third millennium, Númenor was at the height of its power, the greatest realm of men. Great achievements in architecture, art, and technology characterized the later Númenorian Empire, but also a creeping darkness. Númenorian civilization was based on the teachings of the elves, but as Númenorians grew wealthier and grander, they feared that mortal death which elves did not suffer. Resentful of the elves, later kings turned away from their customs, their philosophies, and their wisdom. Opposing the king's men, however, were the faithful, who stayed true to the old ways, led by the lords of Andúnie. Numenor's apogee came in 3261 when King Ar-Pharazôn landed in Umbar with a great army to oppose a resurgent Sauron. His army fled in terror, and Sauron allowed himself to be captured and taken to Númenor. But here he found his ploy. Sauron contrived to become the king's advisor and told him ways of achieving immortality. The king's men turned to worship of Melkor, the foe of the elves, and sacrificed men, largely slaves taken from Middle-earth. Old and fearful of death, Ar-Pharazôn at Sauron's urging built a great armada and sailed west to Valinor, where he believed he could wrestle immortality from the ancient Valar. Sauron's plan worked well, too well, and the Valar called upon the power of God himself, Eru Ilúvatar, for aid. Eru broke the world itself and sank Ar-Pharazôn's fleet, and the sea opened up and swallowed Númenor, killing all inhabitants, including Sauron. Thus passed the greatest splendor of men, never to be seen again, remembered as Atalante, the downfallen kingdom of Gondor. But all was not lost. The faithful had foreseen this disaster and escaped to Middle-earth. Their leader Elendil landed at Lindon, while his sons Isildur and Anarion joined with faithful in Pelargir. Together they organized what Númenorians remained and founded 2 kingdoms in exile in 3320. In Eriador, Elendil founded Arnor, becoming both its king and high king of the Dúnedain, the Westmen. Isildur and Anarion, meanwhile, became joint kings of Gondor, Land of Stone, referring to either the White Mountains or the Dúnedain propensity for building great stone monuments, or both. The Anduin Valley below the falls of Rauros became the nucleus of Gondor. Each brother founded their own fortress, Minas Anor, Tower of the Sun, below Mindolwyn, and Minas Ithil, Tower of the Moon, in the approaches to Mordor, Sauron's country. Between the two, Isildur and Anarion ruled from Osgiliath, Fortress of Stars, on the Anduin. Isildur had stolen a fruit from the white tree in Númenor before it was burned, and planted it in his tower. With them the exiles smuggled 7 palantiri, seeing stones, allowing them to communicate with strategic locations. 4 were apportioned to Gondor, 1 for each tower, and 1 for Osgiliath. Isildur and Anarion ordered the realm and settled their people, expanding into Belfalas and Lamadon west to the Morthond River, Calenardhon between the White Mountains and Anduin, and the island of Tolfalas. To protect the gap of Calenardhon between the White and Misty, or Ithaigelir Mountains, 2 fortresses were built, Aglarond, the Brilliant Vault, and Angranost, Ironhold, where the 4th Palantir was placed. Sauron, however, returned. As an immortal Maya, he couldn't die, but it took him time to regain strength. Well, that strength was regained in Second Age 3429, when he attacked and captured Minas Ithil, burning the White Tree. High Kings Gil-galad and Elendil forged their last alliance of elves and men to defeat Sauron once and for all. Joined by other elves and even dwarves, the alliance invaded Mordor. 3434, Sauron's Tower of Barad-dûr was besieged. Sadly, Anarion was killed. By siege's end in 3441, Elendil and Gil-galad had slain Sauron's mortal form at the cost of their own lives. The Second Age was over. Barad-dûr was leveled, Sauron's orc servants scattered, and Isildur claimed the One Ring, a magical ring Sauron used to concentrate his power. He planted a second white tree in Minas Anor in memory of his brother. Gondor was free to grow and prosper, and to ensure peace in the first years of the Third Age, garrisons were established in Mordor at Durthang, the Black Gate, and Cirith Ungol. Isildur returned to Gondor and committed its rule to his nephew Meneldil, while he would take over Arnor. But in Third Age too, while traveling along the Anduin River to Imladris, Isildur and his men were ambushed by orcs and killed, the One Ring lost. There would be no more High King, and the 2 kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor were sundered. Yet under the house of Anarion, Gondor flourished, having recovered sufficiently since the war. By the 7th century, Gondor was able to project power. King Turambar defeated the Easterlings and conquered the shore of the Sea of Hrun. King Taranon, the Coast Lord, was the first so-called Ship King. By the 10th century, he expanded Gondorian power westwards along the Anfalas and Pinath-Galin to the Lefnui River, and southeast into Horondor to the Harnen River. To the south in Harad, the haven of Umbar had been settled by survivors of the Númenorian Kingsmen, now called Black Númenorians. Carrying their enmity for the Dúnedain, they constantly challenged the Gondorians at sea, raiding their ports and sea lanes as corsairs. King Earnil I put an end to that in 933 when he captured Umbar and crushed the corsairs. His grandson Kiryacher finished the job in 1050 by subjugating the many Haradrim kingdoms, becoming Hjarmendakil I, conqueror of the south. By the 12th century, Hjarmendakil brought Gondor to her height, expanding across the Lefnui into Andras and Enedwaith, reaching the Arnorian border and accepting the tribute of the Anduin Northmen. Sadly, by this point, Arnor had fragmented into three rival kingdoms, Arthedain, Cardolan, and Hrúddaur. The decline of the north was in full swing, but Gondor reaped the fruits of her labors, the grandest kingdom in the Westlands. 1248, King Minalcar defeated more Easterlings, building the Argonath at the head of Nen Hithoel, the Cold Mist Water, to cement Gondor's control of the region. He took the name Romendakil II, but also sowed the seeds of Gondor's decline. The king allied with Vidugavia, a Northman king of Rovanion, and to cement this alliance sent his heir Prince Valakar. Valakar fell in love and wed Princess Vidumavi, and sired a son, Eldakar. The high nobility of Gondor, however, did not approve. The Dunedain ruling class was jealous of their standing. Dunedain were taller, long-lived, wiser, and more insightful than whom they called middlemen, the native peoples they ruled. That a royal should lessen his bloodline by cavorting with a mere Northwoman was unconscionable to many. Such a pairing would weaken the majesty of Gondor and all Dunedain. Court intrigues became preoccupied with this during Valakar's rule, but after his death in 1432, King Eldakar dealt with full-scale rebellion. Prince Castamir, Eldakar's cousin, led a rebellion against his king, winning support from the coastal provinces where many Dunedain lived. 1437, he captured Osgiliath, burning the city, its Palantir lost in the Anduin. Castamir seized the throne and relocated to Pelargir, upsetting many at court. Castamir's increasingly cruel and arrogant behavior alienated his supporters. Eldakar himself had fled to the Northmen and returned in 1447, killing Castamir and regaining the throne. Castamir's sons and supporters retreated to Umbar, allying with Black Númenorians there and seceding 1448. Eldakar was unable to restore control to Umbar, as this civil war, the kin strife, was greatly destructive for Gondor. For 10 years, violence, famine, and Castamir's tyranny cost the lives of many Gondorians, and all the talent, skill, and nobility they possessed. Gondor wouldn't recover for over 1,000 years. The irony was Dunedain lifespans weren't the product of biology, but of their adherence to the elvish teachings of old. Eldakar, despite his mixed heritage, lived to be 235 years old, but the kin strife hastened the Dunedain's decline. Enemies began probing the borders, Umbar itself contesting Harondor. 1634, King Menardil was killed by Umbari corsairs. King Telemnar had it worse when in 1635 a great plague, later found to have been sent by a regenerating Sauron, swept across the Westlands. All regions were affected, but in Gondor, lands like Ithilien and Kalanardon were almost entirely depopulated. It killed Telemnar himself in 1636, and the White Tree followed. When the plague ended in 1637, Eriador was left almost empty, and Gondor severely depopulated. Policy became to protect the core, and Gondor withdrew from Mordor. King Tarondor relocated the capital to Minas Anor, as Osgiliath was still ravaged from the kin strife, and planted a third White Tree. Telumechtar, however, was able to muster the strength and resources to reconquer Umbar in 1810, becoming Umbardakil. But this temporary respite was interrupted when in 1856, a tribe of Easterlings, the Wain Riders, invaded the Brownlands south of the Greenwood, killing King Narmakil II in battle. King Kalamechtar avenged his father's death, but again Gondor had to withdraw, this time west across the Anduin and north across the Poros River. Attempting to arrest this decline, King Ondocher opened relations with the last remaining kingdom in Arnor, Arthedain, and wed his daughter Firiel to Prince Arvedui. However, neither was able to aid the other due to attacks in the north and south. Ondoher was killed in 1944 when Wain Riders and the Variags of Khand crushed the Gondorians at the Black Gate. Prince Earnil, Ondoher's cousin, killed the invading Haradrim and Easterlings. For this he was awarded the throne as Earnil II in 1945. Prince Arvedui contested, claiming as Ondoher's son-in-law he and his wife had claim to Gondor. But the Council of Gondor, led by Steward Pelendir, sided with Earnil, a Gondorian instead of a foreign prince of some small north realm. But as a show of goodwill, Earnil sent his son Prince Earnor to relieve Arvedwi, now king, in 1975 against its foe Angmar. Sadly, by the time Earnor arrived, Arthedain was destroyed and Arvedwi drowned. 1981, the elves of Evelond abandoned the settlement to sail west, while a nearby stronghold was named Dol Amroth in honor of an elvish king, thereafter the seat of a line of princes. Angmar's ruler, the Witch King, Sauron's most trusted and feared servant, managed to flee to Mordor and taunted Earnor. 2002, he captured Minas Ithil, becoming Minas Morgul, Tower of Sorcery, punching the first major hole in Gondor's inner defenses and claiming its Palantir. So imperiled, Gondor retreated from Umbar and across the Lefnui to defend her shrinking borders. Minas Adnor became Minas Tirith, the guard tower. Earnor had encountered the Witch King in the north and wanted a rematch. When the Witch King taunted him again, against counsel, Earnor left for single combat. He never returned. The matter of succession was complicated. Wars, plague, suspicion, and Dunedain's low birth rates left the royal house lacking in heirs. Any claimants were dubious at best, and the question of Isildur's heirs was moot, if even they survived. And no one wanted another kinstrife. In the end, it was decided Steward Mardil would rule in the king's stead until he returned one day. Stewards of Gondor. The first stewards benefited from the watchful peace, a period when Sauron, still recovering from his defeat 2,000 years before, fled from his fortress of Dol Guldur in Greenwood to unknown places. 2460 he returned, and 2475 a new breed of orc, the Uruk-hai, captured Ithilien and Osgiliath. Boromir's son of Steward Denethor I, not that one, repelled the invasion, and soon the Ramas Echor, the great outer wall, was built to protect Minas Tirith. The situation was becoming ever more desperate. 2510, Steward Kirion warred with another tribe of Easterlings, the Balhoth, probably related to the Wainriders. At the field of Celebrant, the situation appeared hopeless until Northmen from the Anduin Vale, the Eotheod under their lord Eorl, rode to their rescue. The Balchoth were crushed, and in gratitude Kirion gave to Eorl the empty province of Kelenarthon, including the fortresses of Aglarond and Angranost, becoming first king of Rohan. Thereafter, Gondor and Rohan became eternal allies, to answer one another's call for aid. The border between the two ran west along the Glanhir River, or the Bering Stream, thence along the spine of the White Mountains. The tale of Gondor then became surviving against further incursions. 2746, Corsairs attacked Dol Amroth. When Steward Belecthor II died in 2872, the third White Tree did as well, but it was left standing until the king's return. 2885, the Haradrim were repelled at the Poros, and 2901, the outposts of Cair Andros and Henneth Anun were established to increase defense across the Anduin. 2951, Sauron finally returned after being ousted from Dol Guldur, and he committed to the attack on Gondor. 2954, Orodruin, Mount Doom, erupted, and the last Gondorians fled Ithilien, officially pushing Gondor's border to the Anduin. War of the Ring. But a most unlikely creature had found the One Ring, a hobbit of the Shire in Eriador, a certain Bilbo Baggins. The wizard Gandalf discovered this in 3001. A council was called in Imladris in 3018, who, among others, Boromir, son of Steward Denethor II, that one, was in attendance. The council finally decided that it must be taken to Mordor and cast into Mount Doom's fiery chasm, a most dangerous mission. The Fellowship of the Ring, consisting of 4 hobbits, a dwarf, an elf, Gandalf, Boromir, and a northern Dunedain ranger named Aragorn, set out the 25th of December, 3018. Their involvement in the War of the Ring proved decisive. Boromir would be killed in early 3019, but it turned out Aragorn was a descendant of Arvedwi and claimant to the Gondorian throne. He would lead forces in Rohan, Gondor, and Mordor, and Frodo Baggins, bearer of the One Ring, succeeded in his quest to destroy it, with the indispensable aid of a Samwise Gamgee the Brave. Sauron's power was undone, his tower of Barad-dûr thrown down, and the forces of Mordor defeated. Steward Faramir would hand over the rule of Gondor to Aragorn, who took the name Elisar as king. Under Elisar, Gondor was rebuilt, its old lands reclaimed, including Umbar and the east, the oath of Rohan renewed, and Arnor refounded. Under Elisar and his son King Eldarion, Gondor's glory and splendor was restored, ushering in the Fourth Age in peace and prosperity. Gondor sure was a lot, huh? That's what happens when you have over 6,000 years of history. Maybe someday we'll return to Middle-earth. It's a big place. Thank you for watching.